And welcome back to Tech Tuesday. I'm Steve Leahy. Okay, so you've got your shiny new airbrush and you're trying to get going with it. So today's video is for those people just like that. It's not a complete beginner's how-to, but I want to give you one kind of technique in a way that will really kind of help you along and get your airbrush working and get your skills where they need to be. So let's switch things around and we'll get right to it. Okay, so what I do is I grabbed a few different airbrushes. I'm not even going to put links to the airbrushes that I have here, this setup here, because that's not really important. What is important is that that you kind of get this thing I'm going to show you down. So I'm going to grab a piece of paper here. And like I said, I grabbed a few different airbrushes just so we have a little bit of variety, so you can see that it works with everything. Back this out a little bit. That's going to work just fine. Okay, for the paint, again, this is what's beautiful about this technique. It'll work with every paint. It'll actually show you a lot about the viscosity of the paint, how the paint works with the airbrush that you've purchased. It'll ultimately give you a lot of control over whatever brush you get. But for today, we're going to be using the Wicked Opaque Black just because it's easy to see and it sprays really nice too, so it'll give a good example of what we're talking about. Again, this isn't a video on reduction or anything, but I will need to reduce the paint a little bit. So for that, I'm going to use the 4011 reducer. Again, you know, you just use whatever reducer is meant for that paint. That's a whole other video. It goes on and on. So the three airbrushes that I picked for today, just randomly, I have a DeVilbiss Dagger, which is a gravity feed airbrush from DeVilbiss. I grabbed the another gravity feed brush. This is the Extreme Arrow by Badger. This isn't the handle that comes on it. I kind of had this handle from Thayer and Chandler, a little brass handle. But anyway, again, not important. And finally, I dropped stuff. Of course I dropped stuff. We may not be able to use this one. Oh boy. This is the Iwata Eclipse BCS, and this was the bottle fed that I picked for this. However, like I said, I just dropped the cup off it, so it's on the floor somewhere. So we'll put that one aside for a minute, but I can still use it. I can still show you some stuff with it. All right, without the cup. All right. So let's start with the Badger. Again, I just picked three different airbrushes. This one's kind of a really tighter detailed brush. This one's kind of an all-purpose brush, and then the Eclipse is a big, you know, kind of, you know, all-purpose heavy-duty airbrush. All right. So the number one thing, again, this isn't going to go over a bunch of techniques. It's really one I want to get to, but to get to it, I got to do a few other things first. So when you have your airbrush, you've probably been on the internet looking at videos or tried it out already, and you know that a double action airbrush, you push down for air, and then you pull back for paint. So for the rest of your airbrushing career, this button will always be down. So air on all the time. That's the number one thing. If you're aimed at the surface and you're painting, that air is going. So let me introduce some air so you can hear that. Okay, so you're getting ready to paint. That air is always on. There isn't an instance where you pull it off and then move. If you're aimed at this, you're always on. Just get into that habit, and it'll save you a lot of aggravation. But again, that's not the technique we're looking for. What we're looking for is this pull back, this introduction of paint. The more you pull this back, the more that needle is drawn back in the front, and that's what allows the paint to escape out. And the more that's pulled back, the wider that opening is and the more paint can flow. So normally, let me put some paint in this. Again, this is already pre-reduced. It's the same paint that I just showed you, but I pre-reduce it a little bit. And again, this isn't important for this video. But you know, I'll definitely do another Tech Tuesday video where I show all this as far as the reduction goes. So there's paint in the cup right now. So as I aim at the surface and then pull back, I'll start to get paint to flow like that. So if I pull back a lot, I'll get a lot of paint to flow. So here's the technique that you want to get down. And what it is you want to get, it's basically a dot. So just like I did here, but not as much paint. So you aim at the surface with the air going first, and then you just very gradually pull that trigger back. Now, you'll see a lot of exercises where they have you do these dots where you're just kind of aiming at the surface and making dots. That's great and everything. It gets your, kind of the back and forth motion working for you. But what you really want to do is you want to concentrate on getting that dot to develop really, really slowly, like imperceptibly slow like that. You want to find the moment on that trigger where the paint just starts to sneak out. That's what you got to look for. If you get that down, if you can control that airbrush so that you can just get like the minutest amount of paint to come out, that's where you're going to be doing 80% of your airbrushing, or 90% really, because that's the control of an airbrush, to be able to just breathe out that paint. So all your fades and everything, when you're fading in different areas, all that has to do with that very beginning part of the travel of that trigger. So if you've ever driven a standard car, it's the friction, that moment of friction with the clutch, where even though the clutch has a lot of motion, you push that pedal all the way down, there's really only that tiny, tiny little bit where the gears mesh. And it's the same thing with an airbrush. You want to find that moment. Now, different airbrushes are going to have a different feel. The bigger, fatter brushes, the brushes with bigger nozzles and needles, that's going to be harder to get that. You're going to have to work a little bit more to get that, nearly imperceptible spray. Let me show you that. I'll jump up to the DeVilbiss, which is a little bit, this is a bigger, like a heavier nozzled brush meant for thicker paint. I'm going to use that same paint in this brush now. Do exactly the same thing. So this one, because it can move a lot more material, will easily flood out just like that. And that's just too much paint. It doesn't have a chance to dry when it hits the surface. It just moves, just flows across. But if you take a second with this and just kind of aim it at the surface, again, air is going, and I just really just like slowly, as imperceptibly as I can, and let me show you that with a piece of paper because it's tough to see by itself. But if I block off a bit of this, like right here, and I do that same thing from pretty far away, and you can be as far away as you want. The distance doesn't matter really here. You're looking for that control. Now watch when I pull this away. You can see the crisp line there, but you can see how light that paint is coming out of here. That's the control you need. That will show you what the airbrush that you bought will do. If it's a brush that really doesn't have a lot of control, if it's not a great brush, it'll be difficult to get that fade to work that way. You'll just get a lot of paint all at once, so it'll really tell you a lot about the brush that you have. So this brush, again, you can get those really nice soft fades. And if I could show you percentage, or like scale wise, on this brush and the Badger too. If this is the top of the airbrush and this is the trigger in the most forward position, you're talking about pulling it back like this far. That's it. Now you have this amount of pull in it, and this is what I did when I wanted to flood it like that. I pull it all the way back, and that's what happened with the flood. But that tiny little, just when you just start to pull it back is when you get that paint to flow. That's what you want to be in control of with your brush. Now, you're not always going to be painting like this. Sometimes you are going to be filling in a big area, but the control from the brush, all the fades and the blending and even the detail is the same as what I'm doing here. You're just much closer. So that is a DeVilbiss, and I can show you this, but I can't show you it with a lot of paint because, again, I dropped the cup. There's a little cup that plugs in the bottom of this guy, and then that's how it works. But I can put paint right in the siphon opening here. So flip it upside down. This is not recommended. If you get this airbrush, you're gonna have a bottle with it, or a or a cup or something. So anyway, there is paint in there now, but it works the same way with the BCS. So this is the biggest of the three, but even with that same exact paint, that same reduction, I can just barely pull that trigger back and get that paint to just sneak out. That's what you want to do. That's what you want to practice. You can do all the dots you want, but that fading in of the color like a Polaroid is going to give you all the control you need, as I'm dripping paint all over myself now. So that's why you don't do that. Anyway, You get the idea. All right. So in quick recap, so it's air down all the time. You notice all the time I was kind of aiming at the surface, I had that air going. That's really, really important. That's a great habit to get into. Extend that habit in the beginning too. Like I said, be obnoxious about it. As long as you have that airbrush kind of headed toward that surface, push that air down and make sure that's on all the time. The big reason why is because if you keep the air on all the time, especially when you end the fade or the stroke or whatever you're doing with the airbrush, when you leave that air on at the end, it cleans off the end of the needle. It just removes whatever wet paint is still on there. If you just let the trigger go with paint still on the needle, it's going to dry on there almost right away, and you'll constantly be battling with the paint clogging and tip dry and all that fun stuff. So if you get in the habit of leaving the air on more than usual, it'll always clean that off. So it's a good tip to kind of get into, but it really wasn't the point of this video. The real point is that just that moment when you're pulling that trigger back and you just get paint to kind of sneak out of the brush, that's what you want to kind of concentrate on. All right, so if you enjoyed this, please consider liking that too, liking and subscribing, and click that bell icon for more videos. There'll be a Tech Tuesday every week, as well as Open Studio on Wednesday and the live feed on Thursday. And for 23, I have kind of another thing in the works for Fridays, so we'll see what happens with that too. But click that bell icon and you'll be notified of everything. All right, so for Steve Leahy and Tech Tuesday, you guys are the best. Love you, and I will catch you guys next time.